This is one of those books where people love it with a passion. It becomes a part of them. It becomes important to them, and their minds return to it for years to come. It's that valuable. What's up, guys? I hope everyone out there is doing well. I finally finished a novel that I had considered reading for many years. The great fantasy epic, The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. And this novel has an interesting background. Tolkien was a philologist. He was a master with the study of languages. He was even a professor of English in Oxford. And he wrote a novel called The Hobbit that went over decently. The publisher requested from Tolkien a second piece. They wanted a sequel for The Hobbit. Tolkien gave them the Silmarillion, which is kind of a background for the Middle-earth saga. The publisher rejected the Silmarillion, and Tolkien came up with an alternative to the Silmarillion called The Lord of the Rings. Now, it's a common misconception that this novel was written as a trilogy. Usually, when an author writes a trilogy, they plan it in advance, sometimes not, but they'll write the first piece, publish it, sell it, then they'll sit down and write the second piece, publish it, sell it, then they'll write the third piece. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings as one novel. In his mind, it was in 6 parts or books, but it was one piece. And after the Second World War, England suffered paper shortages for many years afterward. And due to those paper shortages, as an economic decision, the publisher chose to release just a piece of the novel that we now know as The Fellowship of the Ring. Now, I will confess that I had never seen the movie, so this whole thing was new to me. I was excited about getting into this and seeing what this great classic was really all about, even though I had a little bit of a loose idea based on pop culture references. This book is about a hobbit named Frodo Baggins, a dark ring of power, and the Dark Lord Sauron. You see, the Dark Lord Sauron, in history, many years ago, created using magic the Dark Ring of Power. The ring was lost to him, and he's seeking it back out. He wants to take over Middle-earth and rule the innocent people there. He is a tyrant, is Sauron, and he's forming an army in Mordor, and he's seeking out the ring so that he can rule Middle-earth. Now, Frodo inherits the Ring of Power from his uncle Bilbo, and the wizard Gandalf comes to Frodo one day and explains what the ring is. Frodo's clueless about this whole problem that's come up in the world, and he's cast into this big problem. He's just a simple hobbit that now has this great burden put upon him, and it's up to him and a fellowship that he assembles, along with the help of Gandalf, his partners, his friends, his collaborators, the Fellowship of the Ring, to take the ring from the Shire, which is in the east, or in the west, actually, the Shire in the west, and take the ring all the way to Mordor, deep in the east, where the Dark Lord Sauron resides with his army of evildoers. You see, in Mordor, there is Mount Doom, which is kind of like a volcanic mountain, and the only way that the Dark Ring of Power can be destroyed is by taking the ring and throwing it in that hot lava at Mount Doom, where it will be basically disintegrated and ruined. Now, moving on to the pros and cons of the book, the first pro that comes to mind is the characters. Tolkien was truly a literary genius when it comes to character development. These are some of the best characters that have ever been written in the history of authorship. Gandalf, of course, is most people's favorite. The very wise wizard, who is somewhat of a godlike being, who is also limited in many ways. I appreciated the fact in this book that the magic isn't overdone. It can be common in fantasy epics where characters have so much power that it seems like nothing will be able to overcome them, but Gandalf is not that. Many of the things he uses his magic for are very little, I don't want to say irrelevant, but You see, the characters have to use their minds and their loyalty to get through the troubles. And I just can't say enough about how much I appreciated the limited scope of Gandalf's powers, at least in some way. And of course, Frodo was a very lovely character. In this book, the question comes up, why is it that Frodo has to carry the Ring of Power to Mount Doom? Wouldn't it make more sense that Gandalf take the Ring of Power? You see, there's something special about Frodo's character that makes him the best candidate to carry the ring. And he's a lovely character creation by Tolkien because of this. I absolutely love Frodo. In fact, while I was reading the novel, I loved Frodo so much that I actually bought a Funko Pop toy of him, and I'm going to get them all with The Lord of the Rings. I loved this story, but I like the way that the characters here, like Frodo, are very good, but there is also a dark part of them. I think that what this story is ultimately about, as an armchair philosopher here, is about the good and the bad within all of us, that struggle that people go through and what societies go through when it comes to desire and temptation. Those are big themes here. I think it's about the struggle of good versus evil within every one of us. And Tolkien, with the characters here, tries to show us both sides of the characters. Samwise Gamgee is a lovely, lovely character. I think that outside of Gandalf, he's probably most people's favorite. He's loyalty personified. If anyone in life ever had one friend, even half as loyal as Samwise Gamgee, you know what it is to have a true friend, if that's the case for you. I love the fact that he was very protective of Frodo Baggins throughout this whole trip. And he was very skeptical of Sméagol, who is another very lovely character in this novel, or Gollum, Gollum is the representative of what the Ring of Power can do to a person. Gollum used to be a hobbit, a store hobbit, I believe. A little different species of hobbit than Frodo and Bilbo and Samwise Gamgee, but a hobbit nonetheless. And the ring crushed him. It crushed his spirit. It actually physically deformed him into another creature. That's how powerful the ring is. It truly is the most dangerous weapon by far in all of Middle-earth, cast on Frodo Baggins out of nowhere. But I love the characters, both good and bad. I really liked Saruman. You know, Saruman is a person who was corrupted by the temptation within him. That's what he represents, I think, in this novel. And I thought that he was a very good counterpart to Gandalf. They're both wizards. And Sméagol is kind of the counterpart to Frodo. Frodo's character is such that, you see, the ring is given to Frodo, at least perhaps in some respect, because Gandalf realizes that if he takes the ring, that there's a lot of potential there for evil, because Gandalf is very powerful. He's probably the second most powerful wizard in the land when the novel begins. And he recognizes that if he were to become corrupted, and he were to even try to use it for good, that it would eventually take over him and he would become evil. Frodo Baggins is kind of, I don't want to say helpless, but he doesn't have the potential for evil perhaps that Gandalf has, and that's a great part of his character. And I just loved him. It's so hard for me to talk about who the best character was in this novel. I thought that Saruman was great. I thought that the Dark Lord Sauron was great. Boy, would I like to see the tale from his perspective, a novel written from his side of the story. I love those kinds of books where we get the opposite look. But I will say that the characters here are absolutely second to none. And that's probably the primary reason that I didn't get bored with this novel like I thought that I might. It wasn't a hard, slow read for me like I thought that it might be. I think that the characters were so rich and genuine and defective and believable, with dialogue that was authentic. And I just loved it. And I think that the characters are why this story has endured for as long as it has. Another pro here is the plot itself. It's good versus evil on an epic scale, and that's what we see when we look out into the world at real life events. We see good versus evil on global scales, on scales of our own neighborhoods, and even in our own personal lives. We see good versus evil. So I think that people can just really relate to this particular kind of plotline, and I love the journey. You know, so many modern authors have kind of copied this rough template for a story, and I think it's deserving of being copied, by the way. I think that authors should try to retell this story. It's that good. But it's a lot of fun to go on these long journeys, and that's why modern authors have these 10, 15 book huge epics that's all about this huge journey that plays out with background and scope and depth and many character relationships playing out over generations. That's really an enjoyable thing to go through as a reader if it's well done. And I think that Tolkien hit a home run here, and this is a real testament to his genius, is the journey that plays out in this novel. There are many poems throughout this book that show up in the form of song, and I actually really enjoyed those. I thought that they contributed to the book, and that's kind of saying a lot because I'm someone that doesn't really read poetry. I've always struggled with it, and a lot of times it doesn't flow for me. And I was kind of worried a little bit when I initially flipped through the book and I saw all the songs in there. But I thought that they were very beautiful, and it was obvious that Tolkien had taken a lot of time and he put a lot of thought into the songs that the characters sing throughout the book. And I thought that it just worked very well. From the singing trees to Tom Bombadil singing and dancing and praising and enjoying life, I thought that the poetry in this book really, really worked well. It's hard for me to come up with anything that I disliked in this book, and I don't want to sound unsophisticated here. I just enjoyed this one so much more than I thought I was going to. It's hard for me to think of any particular thing that was giving me trouble with the novel. I know a common criticism here is that the book is kind of long-winded, it's slow in parts, and people say that the language can be kind of dated, a little bit tough to get it to roll. I didn't think that was the case. I felt that this particular fantasy book could have been authored by a modern author. It felt so timeless to me that I did not experience many of the criticisms that people have had for it. I will say that maybe I can understand where people are coming from with that kind of thing. It is a little bit different than a modern fantasy. For example, Brandon Sanderson has taken the pacing in fantasy to a whole new level, in my opinion. And perhaps Sanderson is better with pacing than Tolkien was, but I thought that the story was just so engrossing and interesting and fresh and unlike anything I have ever read before that it was hard for me not to just enjoy it and kind of race through it. I really thought it was basically about as brilliant as any story could possibly be. This is like the maximum attainable level for a piece of artwork. It truly is arguably the greatest novel that's ever been written, and I think that it will stand the test of time for many years to come. I did expect that I would have some complaints when it comes to the end, and if any con can come in here, this is where it will be for me, guys. I thought that Tolkien actually did a very good job wrapping the novel up. It would be a huge challenge for an author to take a tale of that length and of that intricacy and kind of wrap it up fairly quickly at the end. That would be very hard to achieve. And I thought that Tolkien did very, very good with that. I won't get into what happens with the climax of the novel here. I will say that Gollum kind of has a hand in things to some degree, and I'm not sure what Tolkien was going for with that specific part of the plot and what happens with Gollum toward the end of the novel. There are many kind of philosophical points that I probably missed in this book, and that's something that I do want to tell you all, that Tolkien seemed to be a master of understanding motive and what drives humans and hobbits. And I thought that his philosophical ruminations on human nature were very, very deeply considered and understood by him. He must have read many, many philosophical and psychological works throughout his time, because something that really enriches the characters here, and here I am going on about something that I liked when I'm supposed to be giving a con, but I thought that one of the reasons that the characters were so well done is because Tolkien really just understands human nature like a professional philosopher or a psychiatrist would. He just understood the workings of the human mind, and that showed up in his character base, and I loved it. When it comes to the ending, I thought that the different threads were pulled together nice and in a kind of clean fashion. The one criticism I'll give here is with Sauron and what happens with him at the end of the novel. I thought that it was fitting, and I actually kind of liked seeing what happened with Sauron toward the second half of the novel. You get a sense of what can happen to someone when they're extremely selfish and reckless. But he comes to fruition in this novel in a way that I thought was kind of fitting but rushed. It kind of just went quickly with him. Maybe I would have liked to seen a little bit more about what could have happened with him, but it's very hard for me to criticize this novel because I thought that it was just a wonderful, wonderful journey and fabulous, phenomenal, basically unachievable piece of artwork. Do I recommend it? The answer to that question is an astounding yes. I give it my maximum recommendation. Throughout my life, when I've thought about reading the classics like Alexander Dumas and Charles Dickens and H.G. Wells or any other classic, sometimes I can be a bit apprehensive because I'm afraid that the novels could be so dated and with language that's not current that maybe I just wouldn't enjoy it. I fear that sometimes with classics. Now, I've been pleasantly surprised many times throughout my life with classics, but I thought I wouldn't enjoy The Lord of the Rings, and that's why I didn't read it for so many years. And when I read it, it was possibly the greatest thing that I've ever read. And I'm talking about just as far as my own enjoyment goes. I would probably say that I actually enjoyed The Dark Tower by Stephen King a little more, which is nothing but a retelling of The Lord of the Rings, honestly. But I was so surprised that I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. If you're worried about it being dated or slow or hard to go, I would recommend it strongly. I would say give it a try. Immediately pick up a copy and read it. Also, I would say if you're worried about the fact that you've seen the movies, I would still recommend reading the books. Not only are there some things that are quite a bit different about the books, about the book itself. You see, when I watched the movies, I thought that the first one was relatively close to the book. There were some things that were different. The second movie was even further off from the plot of the book. I still have to watch the third one, but I think that it would be worth reading it, even if you've seen the movies, because of what's different and the fact that it's going to be a richer, better experience than the movies would be anyway. It's a novel that's so good that it would be impossible to make a movie version that would be as good as the novel. So I highly recommend it no matter what the case is. My final ruminations here are that I just loved this book. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and I truly am shocked that I'm saying that. I did not expect that I would come to cherish this. You know, this is one of those books where people love it with a passion. It becomes a part of them. It becomes important to them, and their minds return to it for years to come. It's that valuable. I just love it, and I think that as I get into it, I'm even going to love it more and more as time goes by, as I read the rest of the works, as I collect the toys. I actually want to show you a book that I picked up while I was reading this one. The Lord of the Rings and Philosophy. Sometimes things go over my head when I'm reading. With a guy like Tolkien, he's bringing so much to the plate that a person like me is going to miss some. So I'm looking forward to reading the ruminations of these other philosophers. This is a collection of essays that really get into what was happening here and what Tolkien really meant. So I think that that's going to be fun. I guess what I'm getting at here is that I can't settle for just having enjoyed the novel. I liked it so much that I want more, and I can't wait to read further into everything that has to do with this great story. And there it is, my review of The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy reading as much as I do. Thanks for joining me, everyone. I'll see you next time.